Hello, everyone, and welcome back to 305 Insights. I'm your host, Alan Somerton, and today we're doing our conference preview, the final one, the ACC preview. Now, you know the drill already by now. You got the top tier, sleeper teams, teams in trouble, impact players, and the biggest games, the most impactful games on the schedule. So, for the top tier teams for the ACC, we have Clemson and Miami. Clemson is, man, I was really wrong on them last year. Hand up, I admit it. I thought this would be the start of the downfall of Dabo Swinney, but once again, it seems like his greatest detriment is somehow his greatest asset, where he doesn't go into the transfer portal and he develops the kids, sort of an old school mentality, it seems nowadays. But he's got an experienced QB in Cade Klubnik, a kid that he didn't give up on, and Cade has said that repeatedly throughout this summer during ACC media days and whatnot, and that gave him a boost of confidence. They have their best wide receiver room in years with kids that have been developed since year one. And they have a typical Clemson D-line once again with first-round talents in abundance. And they made the playoffs last year. They return a lot of the production. Dabo's back. I mean, even in a year last year where they lost some big games, they still managed to win all the ACC games they needed to outside the Louisville game. And upset SMU in the championship game. Except this time, I think there isn't going to be a lot of losses on the schedule for Clemson. You have the SEC games against South Carolina and LSU to end and start the season. But I think even if they lose one of those, and I don't think they're going to lose either of those, they're still going to make it to the ACC championship game and be the representative of one side of that game. Because there are very few teams, if any, in the ACC that can match them talent for talent. One of the teams that I think can match them in talent is Miami. Again, we'll dive deeper into them this week, but just a quick tidbit on them. Cristobal has really rebuilt the trenches of this program, and without a doubt, they have a top three, but in my opinion, higher. It might be the best O-line in the country. And you've got a lot of talent, young talent on the defensive side as well. You're doing the mercenary QB approach again, bringing in Carson Beck. You did it last year with Cam Ward, and you're trying to apply the same logic this year. After years of blue chip filled recruiting class, this is the time to step up. There's a lot of teams that have some question marks in the ACC, even some of the lower to top tier, like right below these two teams, like SMU, or even some of the teams that I might be talking about next. You still have that talent gap. Can Cristobal not fall victim to one of his, for lack of a better phrase, bonehead decisions that he always runs into every year? Regardless, I do think Miami is one of the top tier teams in this conference, and they are definitely a top 10 team in the country. For sleeper teams, I got Georgia Tech and Louisville. Brent Key is building out Georgia Tech into the competitive team that it should be based on the talent in the state and the surrounding areas for recruiting. He might have lost some talent in terms of the defensive line as well as some playmakers. You lost your best playmaker to, I believe, was Auburn and wide receiver. But you still have Haynes King, even though he does play a very aggressive style that causes him to get injured every so often. But there is a lot of hope for Georgia Tech The schedule isn't difficult at all. I mean, again, you have your game against Georgia and whatnot, but if you look at the overall strength of schedule, they should be able to have a strong season. It's just a matter of they can get the breaks to make it an impactful season. And Louisville, Jeff Brom brings in Miller Moss, the transfer from USC, as his new QB project to, remake it in the way that he can because he's an offensive guru. They bring back Isaac Brown and Duke Watson, who combined for basically 7.6 yards a carry, which is an insane stat, and 17, almost 800 yards, 1,770 yards. Yeah, he just needs the defense to step up slightly. This is almost in the vein, the reverse card of what's happening with Oklahoma. Oklahoma has a really good defense and an atrocious offense. If Louisville can get that defense to be mediocre to decent, this can be a team worth watching. They can make a lot of noise throughout the regular season. Teams in trouble. I know in a previous podcast we talked about Virginia and Virginia Tech, Brent Pry and Tony Elliott having a lot of issues in the DMV area. We're not going to include Virginia Tech on here, but we are going to include Virginia and Stanford. Tony Elliott's group has begun to suffer losses before the season has even started. You got the starting tackle, Thomas. He'll miss a few months. Monroe Mills tore his ACL. I believe he was another tackle or an offensive lineman. D-end Mekhi Buchanan will miss a couple of weeks. And most importantly, linebacker Cam Robinson will miss some games with a fractured collarbone. They're probably saying 3 to 4 games. We'll see if he gets back for the FSU game. The Cavaliers have a very easy schedule, but they must capitalize on it to save Tony Elliott's job. It's going to be hard when you're losing this much talent before the season even starts. Now, again, they're lucky that the season starts off so easily that maybe they can withstand some of these injuries and make their games, just the winnable games matter. But this is more about the long-term effects of these injuries and how this could be another down year for Virginia. Stanford has had 4 straight 3-9 finishes, and they fired their coach a day before spring practice. This is really not how you want to enter a season. I think that goes without saying. But you got Andrew Luck as the GM of the program, and he brought in Frank Reich as the interim coach. He's the former Colts and Panthers coach. And it's his job to hold the program together for a year until they find someone else, or unless he does a halfway decent job. But it's very hard to recruit in Stanford, and it's very hard to keep certain talents that develop. But this is just going to be, again, for a team that's had 4 straight 3-9 seasons, this is going to be a difficult transition year. And it's really hard to see a team that has always been a solid one, and they've had blips of excellent seasons, but you usually see interim coaches halfway through a season or towards the end of a season, but to start a season with an interim coach never bodes well. For impact players, I want to try and get away from the obvious ones. Again, if Cade Klubnik is a presence in the Heisman conversation, Clemson's going to be doing great. If Carson Beck is leading the team to the same heights that Cam Ward led them to offensively, he'll be in the conversation as well. But I think there needs to be a focus on other types of positions for this conference. Specifically when we talk about Clemson, you really want to lean on their defensive line. That's why I think a key player for them is defensive tackle Peter Woods, who transitioned from defensive end to defensive tackle whenever they needed him to do so. So that versatility is tremendous. But this is an individual who is highly regarded by NFL scouts. And if he produces the same way he did last year, if not better, again, Clemson's going to be in the running for a playoff berth and a deep run in the playoffs. For Miami, I would say someone like Ruben Bain at defensive end, if he comes back healthy, in the sense of, I don't want to say healthy, but if he reaches the potential that he showed in his freshman season by being in peak physical condition and being ready to be the dominant force that he should be, I am not going to go with him, though. Who I'm going to go with is offensive tackle Francis Mauga. Now, Francis, since day one, has been a monster for this team. He had some growing pains in his freshman year, switching him to right tackle, but you can see the potential he had since day one, and he's only gotten better since then. And he is a mammoth of a human being. The offensive line is where Miami is going to live and die. You have two talented running backs. You have a QB that performs well when he has a strong running game and when the pocket's clean. And even though he may have inexperienced wide receivers, this offensive line, led by Francis, will be the key to Miami returning to championship contention. I also have Duke QB Darian Mensah, the transfer from Tulane. He cost a pretty penny for Duke. They moved on from Malik Murphy, and they believe this is their QB. A Manny Diaz-led defense is always a feisty one, a blitz-heavy one, but if he has a competent offense, Duke is going to be one of those teams. Again, on paper, historically, they've always been an easy win for a significant amount of the members of the ACC. However, over the past few years, they've been really built up by Elko and Diaz maintaining it. So this transfer is going to be significant for Duke because he could provide an offensive spark that hasn't been there for quite some time. And finally, I'm going to be a homer and put FSU defensive tackle Darrell Jackson Jr. With Tony White's new 3-3-5 defense, the nose tackle is of the utmost importance, and Darrell Jackson is a man among boys when it comes to his measurables and just his elite level traits. It's just a matter of consistently putting it on the field. There's a reason why he came back to FSU. I'm sure they paid him handsomely in NIL. B, he was convinced that he could significantly raise his NFL stock and become, if all things break right, a first round or second round pick. Because again, athletes like Darrell Jackson do not grow on trees. If Darrell Jackson has a good season, then that means FSU's defense is going to be significantly better than it was last year. And you can start looking at a quicker turnaround for Mike Norvell and company. However, we'll discuss that more in our separate FSU podcast. So, that being said, who do I think wins the ACC? And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention a few teams, just for storyline purposes. Do a little extra tidbit here for the ACC. How is North Carolina going to do under Bill Belichick, calling himself the 33rd team, I believe? There's 32 teams in the NFL, if I'm not mistaken. So they'd be the 33rd team because that's how they're going to run this college program. I think there's going to be a lot of growing pains. I think Despite the schematic advantage I think they might have, you still need the athletes on the field, and I'm not sure if they have those. It's a good storyline worth watching. I think they'll be a solid team. I just don't think that they'll be a team that people expected to go 8-4, 9-3, or anything like that. Solid team, but Bill Belichick has been known to be a defensive savant, but offensively, there's some challenges there. And can they make that up? SMU was the surprise team of last year, and it's clear that they are a massive addition to ACC because of the NIL/boosters that are helping revive that program. And for the time being, the talk around the ACC is how long will this conference stay together? Once that 2030, I believe, is when you can start leaving the conference for a significantly less amount of money. But again, for the time being, the ACC did a smart move by bringing in SMU and allowing them to kind of negotiate their way into saying, we don't need any TV revenue, our boosters will handle it. So they're kind of, for all intents and purposes, getting a free team in SMU. And both programs are being, or both sides of the deal are being rewarded for this. Do I think SMU is up there with Clemson and Miami? Not necessarily, but I think they're one tier below them. They do return a lot of production. Their QB and Jennings and Brashad Smith at running back. It's just a matter if they can keep up with the depth aspect. And kind of saw with SMU against Clemson and against Penn State how later and later in the season, when you don't have your ones out on the field or they're hampered and going up against the ones and or maybe twos of these top tier teams in the country like Clemson or Penn State, that's where the difference is. I commend SMU for all the rebuilding that they've done over the past 40 some odd years, or however long it's been since the death penalty was handed down to them. I think they're in a good place right now with Rhett Lashley as their coach. But again, I still think Clemson and Miami, despite Miami's questions with their head coaching, I think that I don't want to go on a limb, and I think that Miami's going to win the ACC. I'm not going to be that much of a South Florida homer. I do think Clemson's going to win this conference. And it's just a matter of hoping that Miami makes it competitive in the sense of the way SMU did last year towards, the end of the game. But you want to see that clash of titans. Miami firing on all cylinders, Clemson firing on all cylinders. Since, what was it, 2004-ish, since they brought some of these programs into the ACC, certain things have never come to fruition. You've had Clemson and FSU as the primary standard bearers for this program for the past 2 decades or so. But Miami never elevated itself to that level. It's unfortunate because there were dreams of having multiple FSU versus games because they were on opposite divisions, and you could feast on that rivalry multiple times. They never met in the ACC championship game. Miami could have made it one year, but they were banning themselves for the issues that we're having with boosters and whatnot with Shapiro. And I believe they made it for that undefeated season under Mark Richt, but nothing happened. They didn't win. I know the season they start off 10-0 and they finished 10-3. So is this the year that the ACC, about, again, 20 years too late, gets a Miami matchup in the ACC championship game? And I think they will. So Again, we'll dive deep into it more in the schedule for aspect for later on, but I do think they make the championship game. However, I think Clemson is still the superior team, and Clemson is the representative in the college football playoffs for the ACC. However, I do think they get two teams in, and I do think it's Clemson and Miami. Do they get the surprise team? I don't think so. I don't know if it's going to be enough for Louisville to go somewhere or SMU, but we'll see how it shakes out. But that's the final episode for my Power 4 preview. You know the drill that I'm about to go through. You can follow us on YouTube, subscribe, like, comment for feedback. Find us on Apple Podcasts, find us on Spotify, and do the same there. Rate us high, subscribe, like, follow, do all that stuff. This week, we're going to have more in-depth FSU previews and previews before the season starts. We're going to kind of break down the returning production, the talent that we expect to make impacts that are new, and what we expect them to do this season in a wins-losses point of view. And we're going to try to do a weekly feature where we predict who we think is going to win the big games and then review them later on. But that's it for today's episode, folks. Look out for that new stuff on the horizon. Turn those notifications on. Thanks for listening. Thanks for stopping by. And we'll catch you next time here on 305 Insights. Have a good one, folks.